And let's all give a warm welcome in our own way to our presenter, Michael, who will be presenting preparing custom and contributed code for Drupal 9.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here, and welcome to preparing custom and contributed code for Drupal 9. Let's see if we can get this going. All right. My name is Michael Lutz. I'm a senior engineer at 4 Kitchens, and I want to give today a brief run-through of the state of Drupal 9, where development's at, and try to give you all some idea of what's going to be involved in preparing code that you maintain to run on Drupal 9. Along with, most importantly, showing you what steps you can take right now so that you and people that use your code can take advantage of Drupal 9 as soon as possible after its release. So let's start just by touching a little bit on where Drupal 9 development is at right now. And it's very exciting. We have a firm release date. Drupal 9 will be released on June 3rd, 2020. We had a few potential release windows, and the core developers have managed to hit all the requirements for our earliest potential window. On March 13th, they committed the last milestone that was required to release Drupal 9 beta. And as of now, that beta is scheduled for an imminent release either today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow. I think it would have been out earlier this week, but we had a security release on Wednesday, which we pushed it back a little bit. So now that we reach those milestones on time, we're going to look at getting an RC out probably early May, and then the Drupal 9 will be released on time on June 3rd, 2020. And at the same time, we're going to release the Drupal 8.9 long-term support, the LTS edition. On top of all of that, the Drupal 8.9 beta will also come out next week, most likely next week. And at the time that beta comes out, we're going to branch off Drupal 9.1. So even as we finish wrapping up the initial Drupal 9 release here, development of the next iteration with all the exciting new features and everything that comes along with it is going to be starting next week. So that is exciting. So now we know when Drupal 9 is coming. Let's get to the main point of this particular presentation. With the upcoming release comes the question of upgrading. If you run or maintain a Drupal 8 site, you're going to want to know what you have to do to upgrade that site to Drupal 9. If you provide or maintain a Drupal 8 extension like a module or a theme, you're going to want to know what you need to do so that module will continue to work with Drupal 9. Today, this presentation is going to be really focused on the first group, the people that are maintaining Drupal sites. However, a lot of what I talk about, especially when it comes to preparing your code and updating your code, fixing deprecations and such like that, is going to apply equally to both groups. So this presentation should be useful to everybody. Again, especially when we start talking about deprecated code and how you can detect and fix that stuff a little bit later. So, in order to successfully upgrade a site from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9, and I really want to stress that this process is an upgrade. It's not build a new site, do a data migration. It's nothing like what you might have gone through if you tried to move a site from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. The steps needed in order to perform a successful upgrade, there's a few of them. And the really good news is that you have everything you need to do most of these steps right now in your Drupal 8 site in order to be ready to hit the upgrade button on June 3rd. And that's really one of the takeaways I want everybody to get out of this presentation is that it's not about waiting till Drupal 9 comes out and then doing something. It's a whole bunch of things that you can do right now so that the day Drupal 9 is released, you're ready to go. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure your server supports Drupal 9. I'll give some details here, but Drupal 9 is going to have different server requirements from Drupal 8. You're going to want to make sure that any custom code that you have, any custom modules or custom themes are compatible with Drupal 9. And that's probably going to be the largest portion of this presentation. Is just going to be dedicated to how to get that code updated and ready to go. In addition to your custom code, you're going to have to audit your contributed modules that you're using. Make sure that they are ready for Drupal 9. If they're not, you can go look for replacements. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. Finally, if you're on an older version of Drupal 8, you need to upgrade to Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 first, because you'll only be able to upgrade to Drupal 9 from one of those two versions. And once all of that is done, you are able to upgrade to Drupal 9.
Michael,
and all that lapse.
Michael,
Yes.
quick interruption. Is it possible for you to move closer to your mic? I'm getting a couple notes that they're a little bit fading.
Gosh, I'm wearing a headset. This is my mic. I'll try to speak a little louder, if that'll help.
Let's try.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, hopefully I can speak a little louder here. Anyway, well, the last step obviously has to wait until Drupal 9 is released. Well, let me double check. Give me 2 seconds here to make sure I'm using the right microphone. It should be.
Yeah, I don't think it is your headset mic. We didn't notice before.
How is that? Is that better?
Oh.
Is that any better? Is that
Yes,
better?
much better.
I was not using my headset mic. I apologize for that.
Well, we should have
Thank
tested that earlier.
I guess so. I thought it was on, so that's my bad.
All right, well, let's keep moving. Moving to Drupal 9.
Yep. All right. Anyway, keep moving on. Well, the last steps is going to obviously have to wait till Drupal 9 is released. The first 4 steps in this are things that you can do right now to be ready to upgrade. And I just want to talk a little bit on each point right now. So first off, preparing your server environment. Drupal 9 should not require any more hardware. You don't need to get a beefier server than you had to run on Drupal 8. Actually, in fact, because we removed a lot of deprecated code, it should at some level be more efficient than Drupal 8. But in order to support future development on the platform, the minimum version of many of the supporting pieces of software had to have been increased. And the biggest example of this is with PHP itself. So Drupal 8.8 required PHP 7.0. Drupal 9 is going to require PHP 7.3. And there's a few reasons why we did that. First off, Drupal 9 is based on Symfony 4 as opposed to Symfony 3 like Drupal 8 was. Symfony 4 requires PHP 7.2, so we knew we were going to have at least a minimum of 7.2. And then on top of that, 7.2 is going to reach end of life shortly after Drupal 9 is released. So in this December, 7.2 is going to reach end of life. So using PHP 7.3 as a minimum allows us to use some more modern versions of some of our dependencies, like PHP unit, which is going to minimize the possibility that some future security issue is going to force us to do a dependency update that's going to force us to do a PHP minimum version update somewhere in the middle of the Drupal 9 cycle. So we should be able to be using PHP 7.3 as a minimum all through the Drupal 9 cycle. But in addition to PHP, minimum supported versions of the various databases have been changed. So MySQL or Percona, you're going to have to be in versions 5.7.8. If you use MariaDB, you got to be at least 10.2.7. If you're in SQLite, you have to use version 3.26. If you use Postgre, you got to be at least in version 10. And then finally, if you use Drush, you have to be on Drush 10 in order to work with Drupal 9. Drush 9 will not work with Drupal 9. If you're on managed hosting, you quite likely meet these requirements already, or or you will by the time Drupal 9 comes out. But if you self-host or if you haven't updated some of your software versions in a while, you're going to want to make sure that you meet these new requirements. PHP, I want to talk again real quick. Typically, upgrading your PHP version is fairly painless, but there's seems to always be just like a couple of incompatible backwards compatibility breaking changes to be aware of. A couple of the common ones right now, there's a warning that started getting thrown in PHP 7.2. If you try to count an uncountable object, it used to just return 0, and now it throws a warning. There's a new warning in 7.3 if you use continue inside of a switch statement. So each version of PHP just has a few things like that to be aware of. I've put links up here. Each version of PHP also comes out with a migration guide, which there's a link inside that page that lists to all the backwards and compatible changes of that version. So if you do have to upgrade your PHP version, it's good to be aware of those, review them, and just be aware of any changes that you might have to make before you're ready to upgrade your server. All right, so next we're going to talk about upgrading your code to be compatible with Drupal 9. So what does that mean? Well, deprecations, everybody's absolute favorite thing. I know it's one of mine. Beginning in Drupal 8, we kind of changed the way we developed the next major version of Drupal. While Drupal 8 itself was developed completely separately from Drupal 7, Drupal 9 has been in development inside of Drupal 8 for the past few years, and this has been done partially through the regular introduction of new features, and more importantly for this discussion, through the introduction of deprecations. So through each of Drupal 8's minor releases, new and improved APIs have been created, and at the same time, the old APIs have remained in the code base. These old APIs are, for the most part, still functional in Drupal 8, Drupal 8, and Drupal 8.9, which kind of leads me to one of the other big takeaways for today, is that Drupal 9 is really just Drupal 8.9 with all of this old deprecated API code removed, and then a few dependency updates, such as moving from Symfony 3 to Symfony 4. So what this ultimately means is that if you can adjust your code now to use the newer APIs that are already there instead of the old deprecated APIs, it's going to work in Drupal 8, it's going to still work in Drupal 9. And I want to just go through a common example of what this means here. Going as far back as, I believe it's Drupal 5, Drupal provided an easy way to display a status message or a warning message to users. This method here, Drupal set message, takes two arguments. It takes a message, and then it takes a message type or severity, which is, it's a string. It's either the word status or the word warning or the word error. The method stores the message, and when it comes time to display the next page, you get your nice pink or yellow or green box at the top of the page that has your message in it. And this method still exists in Drupal 8.9. And if you call it, it will still work. It's still going to display your box, but it is not the right way to display a message anymore. Starting back in Drupal 8.5, the functionality to do this was replaced, and it now uses a modern service class called the messenger service. This class has dedicated methods for adding messages of various severities. It has ways to retrieve and delete the messages. It's a service class. It can be overridden. It can be mocked in testing, and it's really just overall a much more modern and useful way to package this functionality. As of Drupal 8.5, if you want to display a message to a user, this is the way that you should be doing it. However, over in the old bootstrap.inc file, we still have the Drupal set message function. Now it's been rewritten. All it does now is take those arguments and pass them back through to this new service. But if we deleted that function, then any code that called it would be broken. So what do? We leave it in and we deprecate it. And so how do we deprecate it? Well, we put a comment on it that it's deprecated. We issue a change record that tells people that they should stop using it. And we trigger a silent error we'll talk about a little bit later, that if you're using certain automated testing tools, you'll be able to find out that, oh, you're calling something that you shouldn't have. So in Drupal 9, this method is not going to exist anymore. If you have code that calls this method, for example, we have, Drupal set message, oops, you did something wrong, comma error. So we're going to call this an error. If you have code that calls this, then it is not going to be compatible with Drupal 9. It's going to throw an error. And so to adapt your code, you need to follow the instructions that are in the change record. In this particular case, it's pretty simple, because you just need to replace this with this. And Drupal messenger add error, oops, you did something wrong. Now, because this new API is a service class and it supports things like dependency injection and it's got additional methods around it, you may also want to take the opportunity to further refactor your code to take advantage of that. If you're calling this from a place where you can manage dependency injection, you might want to inject the messenger service directly. rather than calling it from the global Drupal class. But at the end of the day, becoming compatible with Drupal 9 means replacing your calls to Drupal set message with calls to this service, along with all the other deprecations that you have to fix. And the link at the bottom of the slide is just a link to the change record that describes how you would go about fixing any calls that you have to Drupal set message. So the big thing to do to get your code ready is to go through, find these deprecations, and we'll talk more about that later, and then adjust them so that you're using code that's calling it the new way. And then finally, once all your deprecated code is taken care of and your module is compatible with Drupal 9, the last important step is to declare it to be compatible with Drupal 9. Previously in your module's info.yaml file, or before Drupal 8 it was just a .info file, you used to declare the version of Drupal core that your module was compatible with, like this. You'd say core version 8.x. So this key doesn't support the ability to declare a module to be compatible with more than one version of Drupal at the same time. So it was replaced with the new core version requirement key, which follows composer style syntax to declare which versions of Drupal you are compatible with. So one important thing to note here is if you want to be compatible with versions of Drupal prior to 8.7.7, you need to leave the core key in, simply because before that, Drupal didn't know what this new key was. So without the core key, it won't know that your module is compatible. So it's okay in this case to leave it in where it says core 8x. And as long as you add the core version requirements key, then your module will still be compatible with Drupal 9, because Drupal 9 knows enough to ignore the original core key and use the core version requirement key instead. If you only want to, if you're not worried about being compatible with older unsupported versions, and you only need to be compatible with Drupal 8.7 or higher, or 8.7.7 and higher, which actually includes all supported versions of Drupal right now, then you can actually remove the core key completely from your info file. I just want to point this out because it's one of the kind of tricky things about with it. But back to deprecated code. Let's talk about how you can tell where you might be using deprecated code. So there are a number of ways to find out about code that you might be, or find out the code that you're using is deprecated. In an ongoing process, and once we get into Drupal 9 and we start deprecating things for Drupal 10, I strongly encourage you to keep up with the change records and the release notes on any minor version that tells you new things that we've deprecated. At this point in the cycle, we want to figure out where we're at, because we've deprecated all that we're going to deprecate for Drupal 9. So at this point, it's about getting a list. And there's a few ways to find out and get a list of what deprecated code your project might be using. So we're going to talk about automated testing. We're going to talk about briefly about using IDEs to detect deprecated code. And then finally, we're going to go into static analysis tools. So one of the best methods for detecting deprecated code use, in my opinion, is automated testing. Deprecated code pass trigger this usually silent e-user deprecated error that can, with the right configuration, cause automated tests to fail. So if you have good automated test coverage, then you can test your code against a new Drupal minor version as they come out, and you'll basically be flagged if any of the APIs you call are deprecated. And I find this useful both in contributed modules that I maintain and also in Drupal sites that I maintain with custom code as well. I try to keep the automated test coverage to cover as much as possible, and then I get a flag basically when I'm testing against a new version. It can get tricky sometimes, especially for a contrib module maintainer, to keep all the tests green that you want to keep green, particularly if you're trying to support multiple minor versions of Drupal with the same code base. So if you're trying to support Drupal 8.7 and 8.8 and 8.9 all at the same time, if something was deprecated in 8.8, but the replacement isn't available yet in 8.7, then you might get test failures against 8.8 that you're not quite ready to fix yet. If this is on a custom site or custom code, and you're running automated tests against your custom code, and you should be, then you probably won't have this problem, because you can just write your code to match the actual Drupal version your code is running against. I mean, the other tricky part here, if you have dependencies on other modules that are executing deprecated code, you might also get some failures that you can't easily fix. But I still find this information useful because then you know that this dependency that you're using is not ready for Drupal 9, and you know you can keep an eye on it or find a replacement or figure out what you want to do. And there are ways around both of those issues. You can detect which version of Drupal you're running against and alter your code path accordingly. You can fix issues with dependencies using custom error handlers and things like that. But they can get tricky and very advanced, and then they just kind of add in a bunch of workarounds that you end up having to remove later. So you really kind of have to evaluate whether it's worth it to do that or not. And then also with automated testing, there's certain classes of deprecated code. The really big one being just deprecated constants that we can't really trigger an error on, so they're very difficult to pick those up in automated testing. However, the next two methods that we have to detect deprecated code do quite well with deprecated constants. So many IDEs are able to detect usage of deprecated code. So here I have PHP Storm, and you can see that the call to Drupal set message has a strike through. When you hover over it, it will tell you that the method is deprecated. I find this useful when I'm writing code, make sure that I'm not using anything that's deprecated. And it's also handy just to glance at a file and see if you have any deprecated code that it wants to stand out for you. But it doesn't give you the full deprecation message. It doesn't really tell me what I should do instead of using Drupal set message. It doesn't give me a huge report of all the code in my project that might be executing deprecated APIs. So I find this useful, but it's not the primary source. When I'm going to prepare something for Drupal 9, it's not going to be my primary method of going through and finding out what deprecated code might be using. That is most likely going to be a static analysis tool. And since we started earnestly building Drupal 9, we've had a number of static analysis tools that have been introduced to help detect the deprecated code usage in products. And the current best practice one is to use the upgrade status module. So we started with a command line tool called Drupal check. It was based off PHP stan. This all graduated into a very useful module called upgrade status. And this is probably the best option right now to find your deprecated code using static analysis. So this module has the ability to scan and detect deprecated code usage and list it out by extension for both custom and contributed code. So, this shows the contributed modules and what possible deprecation errors there might be there. There's another section above that will list for custom code, and so it's all kind of separated out and organized, and you can fix one thing at a time. This module can give detailed information as to what calls are made, what the replacement should be. And in this example here too, you see some things listed as fix now and a couple of things listed as fix later. That just goes back to what I was talking about before. There's a few things that may have been deprecated in Drupal 8.8. Their replacements aren't available in Drupal 8.7, which is still supported. So those are the ones that this will say fix later. You may have a couple of choices that you can do there. You can either wait, have a patch ready, release a new version, as soon as Drupal 8.7 is unsupported. So you kind of release a new version right alongside Drupal 9. You could release a new version now that only supports Drupal 8.8 and above. So you have this older version which supports 8.7, and a newer version that supports 8.8 and 9.0. Then you have to maintain two versions. You could also commit workarounds like I talked about earlier, various ways to just figure out whether your replacement exists and use it if you can, and otherwise fall back to the deprecated code. Again, this adds a little bit of technical debt because you'll want to pull those out later. And if you go that last route, then you're still going to show up in the static analysis list because they don't have a way to know that you figured out in runtime whether you can use the deprecated code or not. It just sees that you still have that function call in there. So you'd still show up on one of these lists even though you know that you've adjusted for it properly. So you found all your deprecations. What are you going to do to fix them? In upgrade status, you'll usually see what your replacement code path is. If you need more information, you go find the change record for that particular one. If there's something more advanced that you have to do, the change record will detail what you have to do. But a lot of the deprecations have kind of a one-to-one direct replacement, like that Drupal set message that we mentioned before. So there was a lot of moving these single functions into container services, and so in those cases it's usually just a direct replacement. Switch this line over to the new one, and there are tools that can help automate that. And I won't talk a lot about this, but the Rector project is a project that aims to help with some of the most commonly used deprecations. It currently is limited, and it can only do a few of them, but the top few deprecations, including things like Drupal set message, account for a vast percentage of the detected deprecated API usage in all contrib projects. The last I saw, it took care of the top 4 or 5 deprecations, which covered about 30 to 40% of the total number of deprecations that there are in contrib. And if you're interested in learning more about how you can automatically fix your deprecations, or if you want to help improve this tool so it can fix even more deprecations than it can now, strongly invite you to join Dan Montgomery. There'll be a presentation, Automate Drupal 9 Upgrades, Addressing Deprecated Code as Community. It's going to be in room 324. It is the session immediately after this one. So at, I believe, 3:45 Central Time here in room 324. He'll give you a lot more information on how it works and what you can do to help make it more powerful. I'm running low on time here, but the next step after you fixed up all your custom code is to determine the D9 readiness status of your contributed modules. And fortunately, as we saw earlier, the upgrade status module is another great way to figure out what the status is, or at least start to figure out what the status is of your contributed modules. And if you run this right now against a standard site and a standard set of modules, guess what? You're probably going to find out that a lot of them aren't green on this, and that's okay. This Saturday, I'll be helping to host a table for D9 readiness contributions, and we are going to help submit patches to some of the popular contrib modules and help get them ready for Drupal 9. Also to note, this is able to pull the maintainer supplied information from Drupal.org. So like in this case, you can see the version of Blazy that I've got installed on this site has 119 errors. It's not Drupal 9 ready, but there's a note there that says that I'm on version 1. There's a version 2 out that's D9 compatible. So I know that I need to upgrade Blazy from version 1 to version 2 before I can upgrade to Drupal 9. Whether you're able to help us contribute back and help get more of these modules ready on Saturday or not, this module on the screen is going to just give you valuable insight, telling you when you're ready to upgrade your site. As we get closer to Drupal 9 release, you can keep an eye on this screen, and any modules that don't seem like they're moving to green, you can go into their issue queue. You can see if there's an open issue. You can help with it if you're able. You can post an issue if there isn't one. You can, again, if the module is unmaintained, at least you know, and you can start looking for a replacement module or a better maintained alternative. Finally, the last step, upgrading Drupal core to at least 8.8. Drupal 8 maintained a lot of code to support the database changes that you need to upgrade from one minor version to the next. So to slim down Drupal 9 and give a fresh start, all that update code has been removed. So anything before Drupal 8.8, the code to upgrade to the next version has been removed. So in order to upgrade to Drupal 9, you're going to have to be on at least 8.8 first. So hopefully you are all already either there or you are ready and just finalizing the last steps of your upgrade from the still supported Drupal 8.7. I'm sure nobody in this room is on an older unsupported version, right? Nobody's on a version older than 8.7, right? I hope not. If you are, though, you do need to know that you need to upgrade to at least 8.8 in order to be compatible. But that's it. If you have followed all the steps in this guide, if you prepared your modules and themes, audited your contributed modules, and made sure that you're on a modern version of Drupal, then your upgrade to Drupal 9 should be similar to any other upgrade that you do. Ideally, this is through Composer. You might need to adjust your Composer JSON file to allow Drupal 9 to be installed, but at that point, a simple Composer update, update your database with Drush and cache clear, and you're ready to go, or whatever process you generally use to test an update over a Drupal minor version. And that's about it for me. I want to encourage everybody to come to Contribution Day. I'll be running a table to help contrib. There's also going to be a table for the Rector project that we discussed. And just, you don't have to know code to give back. It will be a first-time contributor workshop, and we definitely want everybody there. Would love it if people would provide me feedback. This is my first virtual presentation session I've ever given, so I'd love to hear what I could do better. Through the link there, or just on the session node page, there should be a form. And I don't know that I really have time for questions right now.
We don't actually, as I was just popping up to say, we are right at time as of right now. But there is a Slack room. We're asking all the speakers to go to the Slack room. This would be room 325. Hopefully you'll be over there to answer any questions we have there. There were a few things in chat. If you haven't read Keeping Up with the Chat, there's a slight conversation, but thanks for the recommendation for the next talk to see. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move rooms, and I'll stop recording. So everybody give a big round of applause here. Or thanks, or thumbs up or something here to Michael.